So let's talk a little bit about two concepts that are important in Romanticism, the picturesque and the sublime. So begin with talking about nature. Nature in the mid to late 18th century, leading into the early part of the 19th century, um, becomes more and more attractive to people. People begin to have the leisure time. We're talking about the middle class. We're not talking about um, the peasants necessarily. They're out in the landscapes all day long, but they're hardly buying art of landscapes. But for the middle classes who are now developing a market for art to actually purchase art for their own homes as opposed to rich patrons or the system of church art. Now we have everyday people buying art, and they're very influenced by the landscape paintings of Dutch and Italian painters. And these paintings, and we'll look at an example of a few in a moment, these paintings had wide and deep prospects. In other words, um, the viewer was at the front of the canvas looking out across a natural um, valley or mountainside, just so really wide landscape filling up the whole screen, the whole canvas, right? Very rugged scenery. There was sort of a kind of a blurring mistiness in the distance as objects disappear, and almost inevitably there are some kind of classical or medieval ruins, and in the foreground are often shepherds or other kind of individuals who were seen as being closer to nature. All right. So this is what developed as preferable. This is what people wanted. This is what they favored at this time. So Claude Lorraine is one of these painters of the Italian school. Um, these are kind of precursors of the Romantics. So again, you see going way off in the distance, things getting misty back here. We have a ruined castle, maybe some kind of lookout tower. Got some folks having a picnic up here in the foreground. Um, Another one by Nicolas Poussin, another famous landscape painter, where everything is really idealized. This doesn't look like a real scene, right? Everything's pleasant and idealized and like before the fall of Eden, before any evil came into the world kind of look, right? And finally, Salvador Rosa. And these paintings were collected by the wealthy. And what was also very popular at this time was um, engravings. So people had sort of pretty much perfected the art of engraving. So you could buy books of prints from other countries. So people enjoyed looking through these prints, kind of like modern day, Wikipedia, right, or Google Earth, where we can look at countries that we can't necessarily visit easily. So people in the Romantic period began taking what they called these grand tours, where they would travel throughout England and particularly the Alps of Switzerland and Italy, um, and they would visit these out-of-the-way places. They were looking for novelty. They were looking for thrills, basically, and they were looking for high mountains and deep valleys and rushing rivers. They weren't looking for natural landscapes they could find in their own backyard or formal gardens. They liked everything a little wilder. And this is part of what we call the romantic sensibility. So here you see all these irregular shapes, trees. This tree looks like it's been, blasted by lightning or something. This is what the taste ran to at the time. All right. Um, so you would see gardens developed that made them look wild. In other words, they were not left to themselves to run amok, but they looked like they had been left to themselves. It was kind of a studied disarray, kind of Disney-like, where they would create pretend ruins, and they would hire servants to dress like shepherdesses from a period that never really existed, kind of like Little Bo Peep kind of shepherds, right? And sometimes the wealthy would have parties where they dressed up like these shepherds and shepherdesses and had these ridiculous picnics. So nature was being created to fulfill the needs of and taste of the people. Kind of an odd sort of thing, but And people would buy these. This is a kind of a mirror. This is a closed one, like a lady's makeup compact. They used to have the compacts that you carry with a mirror inside. So it had kind of a convex mirror that would sort of, you could hold it up and look at the landscape, um, and it would kind of take the outdoors and put it framed like in a painting. Very, very odd. They were called Claude Glass after Claude Lorraine. Um, so the two terms, the sublime and the picturesque, come from two philosophers. One, William Gilpin, who wrote Observations on the River Wye, um, and is very popular. And he explains throughout what he means by picturesque. Um, so he has some things that all picturesque paintings should have in them. So they should be irregular in line, no straight lines anywhere, rough and rugged, very intricate, very detailed, and sharp contrasts of light and shadow. So there always has to be a ruin in there somewhere. Um, a wild, windy, stormy afternoon is preferable to a scene about a pretty little cottage surrounded by flowers. Okay, you're starting to see where they're heading with that. And that's what's called picturesque. Picturesque didn't just mean pretty like we mean today. It had a specific meaning. So here's the interior of Tintern Abbey. I have a photograph of it coming next, a contemporary photograph. But this is how it looked in the 1790s. It was already a ruin at the time. Turner is one of the most famous romantic artists, and you can see how there's a couple of maybe tourists walking through the countryside here and stopping to romanticize, to think about ghosts and fairies and King Arthur and all these sorts of things. We'll talk about it more as we get into the Victorian period, about this love of the medieval age, but it sort of begins here. So there's Tintern Abbey as it looks contemporaneously. Ruins were just delightful. A church that hasn't fallen down, it didn't really mean much to them. But this idea of liking the ruin, Gothic architecture, Gothic novels, and then unfortunately we're just reading a little bit of Frankenstein. But the whole vogue for Gothic novels and things set in mountainsides and ruined monasteries was a huge vogue for quite a while. Um, so that's picturesque. Now we're going to move on to sublime, and we'll come back to this picture in a moment. But this is an example of a sublime painting by Caspar David Friedrich, the monk by the sea. Um, so Edmund Burke developed this term of the sublime, and sublime is really anything in which you're in awe of. For example, a huge storm, things that make you feel small or insignificant, or um, that you can experience death vicariously. So here's the monk right here by the sea, this teeny little guy, and then this vast sky. Here's the ocean, of course, the sand, the ocean, and the sky. But the sky this would feel very oppressive. It would really make you think of how small and insignificant you are. Um, if you were of a religious slant of mind, you would think of how big and awesome God is and how teeny tiny you are. So that was sort of the idea. Is this? It was kind of thrill-seeking as well, like watching a scary movie and being scared, knowing that in real life that would be horrifying and it wouldn't be enjoyable at all. But in a film or in a book, being scared is kind of fun, right? So it's the same thing looking at scenes in nature that are terrifying and could crush you in a moment, but seeing, from the comfort of your, on the other side of the valley, or the comfort of a painting, it's exciting and frightening at the same time, but in a safe way. Um, so he wrote a philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and the beautiful. Again, a very influential book. And it's all about emotion, right? The emotions we feel. And they wanted strong emotions, no mild, pleasant emotions. They wanted big tears, big laughter, big everything, right? Um, so here would be a view of the Roman countryside. Again, we've got our little building over here, but the broad vistas, but this will become more and more enhanced and become more awe-inspiring. For example, in this another painting by Turner, the snowstorm with Hannibal and crossing the Alps down here with his men. You see the men are small in the face of this huge storm. In fact, you see Turner's attempt to paint what wind might look like, right? The swirling of the wind and of the clouds, and we're getting ready to cover up the sun or the moon, whatever that might be. So the storm is definitely the feature here. This fellow, I had come across him before. John Martin painted this cycle of paintings about I guess Judgment Day, the end of the world, in a biblical terms. So you see these rocks crashing down and taking with them. Looks like there's buildings over here, maybe temples. It's hard to say. Just everything crashing into this great fiery lake over here and this great yawning abyss. You see people sliding down into the abyss. This would be considered sublime, not picturesque, right? Um, this is picturesque. This is picturesque. This is sublime. All right. Evoking emotion, particularly that of fear. And this last, well, I've got two more, but the second to the last one, there's a scene in Frankenstein. If you haven't read the whole thing, you know would may not be familiar with it. But at the end, the monster has run away to the Arctic or somewhere. I forget where. Anyway, this is ice. This is ice breaking up on the river, and you can see that over here a ship has been trapped in the ice and crushed. Uh, but without having a body in here, a person, it's kind of hard to see the scale. So I put in Frankenstein's monster right down here, this little guy, a little piece of clip art of Frankenstein's monster, and to kind of give you an idea of how huge all this ice would be. Again, sublime, awe-inspiring. Um, and kind of leads the way for maybe our sensational newscasting, where you have the newscaster sitting up there talking to the weather people about how big is the storm really going to be? Are a lot of people going to die? Right? With almost a gleam in her eye. Here you have a shipwreck, and they're rescuing people from the sea, and you see the remnants of the storm here, the waves crashing up and the clouds in the background. But there's some delight to be gleaned from such a painting of such a scene, where again there would not be any delight in being on the scene and helping these people, or being some of the shipwrecked people yourself. So these are the two terms, the picturesque and sublime, that you're going to be working with this week.